Welcome back to Razmafsar TV. Today I'm having here Greg. Hi, Greg. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Welcome to our channel, Greg. Could you please introduce yourself, who you are?
Sure. My name is Greg Brown. I live in Washington State in the United States. My main professions are I do appraisals. I've been trained through and accredited by the International Society of Appraisers to do what's called USPAP compliant appraisal reports. They're professional appraisal reports that comply with the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice. So they're the real thing. And I do a lot of consulting and I do some periodic brokering of fine art and antiques. My main focuses are on Greater Asia, and but I've worked on photographers like Ansel Adams. I worked on a very rare $250,000 photograph from him, others, but that's the best. So I do a lot of appraisal work, I do a lot of consulting work, and I do some brokering for this fine art, antiques, and antiquities.
Wow, very
And I have for
interesting.
quite a while. I have probably since at this point, 1999, 2000, that range is when
Well,
I started.
long time.
Right.
Could you tell us about what type of antiques you're specialized? Is it like a wide range, or is it like
Yes.
some artifacts?
No, it has to be wide because of the appraisal work. And I've got a fairly long history with Asian art in general. The reason I ended up with Asian art is I nearly married a mainland Chinese woman, and we started an importing business, importing Asian art and antiques and antiquities, but you really can't get any into the country. And so I would say that I'm a generalist Asian art expert and a generalist Western art expert in certain areas. I was a printmaker at university and I went through art school. So Western art's not tough for me. It's actually a lot easier than Eastern art, much
Could you
easier.
tell me why Western art is a lot easier compared to Asian art?
Mainly because uh, you have signatures. You can compare it. They're extremely well documented usually. Chinese art is very difficult. Japanese is much better because they're very litigious people and therefore a lot of it's documented. So to compare, if I take a Chinese painting and I take a Western painting, I can almost always determine that Western painting if it's authentic or not, either through my own research or collaborating with a specialist who may know this specific artist. And so it's extremely well documented. And there's a lot more Western art people studying this stuff than there are Eastern art people. Not that there aren't a lot, but the specialists tend to be weighed, at least for me being in the US, the specialists tend to be weighed in the United States and in the Western world for Western art, right? So there's a lot fewer Western people who are familiar with Asian art at a very deep level. And for Asian art, you've got you've got translations involved. You've got writing patterns involved, which you do with Western artists. I mean, you got to look at how somebody's proprioception writes a signature. You've got seals to deal with, the red seals that are on art. You've got paper. There's just a lot more stuff that gets involved in it, and so it gets complex very fast. So it's much harder to prove than a Western art piece. Not that a Picasso wouldn't be difficult to prove if nobody had seen it since, he painted it. It's still hard to prove. But in general, people are going to say that's almost certainly a Picasso signature versus, this artist from the Tang Dynasty or the Ming Dynasty. You have to do a lot of work to show that it really is that person's artwork in Asian art. It's very, very deep. Yeah, it's kind of like swords. So the swords, you need your information, but at least you can do scientific analysis, right? And that will tell you if it's original or if it's not. You can kind of stop there if you're only looking for authenticity. It's not the case with artworks. Artworks, you often have much more depth you have to go to because there's not really necessarily, unless you're going to spend a lot of money, There's not that scientific analysis that you can just do. Metallurgy you can do.
If you have a painting, how can you tell if it's authentic? What should you do? Because I can
Well,
imagine faking it is easier, isn't it?
well, yeah, right. That's the problem. So I can give you like who would be a really good example that maybe people would know. I'll come up with something, but the so you have the same issues. So if it's a modern painting, you have the exact same issues as Western paintings. Are the materials right? Are the way the painter is painting correct? It's like your swords. The shape has to fit, or it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. Um, is the signature accurate? I had an example where I had a gentleman who he wanted to purchase some Picasso pieces and an Andy Warhol piece and a Miro piece. And so I went in and analyzed the signatures first because it's almost always where I start. Does the signature make any sense? Because if it doesn't make sense, it's not right. Um, and I went into the library at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. I got a whole bunch of Moreau signatures, and I had traced out on a clear sheet of paper the signature on the artwork. And when I set it down and I looked at them, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. It was leaning the opposite direction. The right signature, wrong, wrong style. So it couldn't have been him. Somebody was actually saying, this is a reproduction. This isn't an original. So, but it was a good enough signature. I thought it might be real. But until I put them side by side and saw that, Miro wrote this direction, this signature was the other direction.
That's
The
right.
proprioception was the opposite. It might have been a left-handed guy doing it. I don't know. But there's many of these simple steps you can take. And the basic analysis is just like you would do with a sword. You look at it, you say, does any of this make sense? Because if it doesn't make sense from the start, then you got to question it. If it makes sense from the start, then you got to prove it. And with a Western artwork or a modern Asian artwork, which is a very big industry now, by the way,
Yes.
um, I look at the colors, I look at the shapes, the pattern, the style. Did this guy paint this way often? Or is it very different for him or her, excuse me? And all of those are the little pieces that you take into the puzzle. Do the pigments look right? I mean, if you really have to get down to it, if I have $1 million painting, I'm going to want to know, are my pigments right? Are the materials right? Is the framing right? You can flip a painting over sometimes and know that fast it's modern.
What do pigments tell you on a painting?
It's a good question. Well, with a well-known artist, most of that information is known, the different materials they used. And so you know what pigments they used.
Oh,
And so if you know the pigments, you just got to say, all right, so this is an expensive enough painting we can do a pigment analysis on, right?
yes.
So is it the same material? I mean, there's a lot of things. I'll give you a very interesting example of finding out how an ancient Chinese painting can be determined to be fake very fast. And that is you need a good translator who knows the language very well. And I happen to be married to one, oddly enough. She's the best Chinese calligraphy translator I've ever worked with by far. And that's not because I'm married to her. She's just really impressive in this piece of her reality. She was an ancient literature a Chinese literature person. So she's had to study all the ancient languages all the way through to the modern.
Yes.
Um, but if you have a Chinese painting, scroll painting, and you find a simplified character in it, in the writing and the black that would be written on it, you know it's modern because that didn't start until Chairman Mao came into office and he initiated simplification of Chinese language. So if you find one character that's simplified, the whole thing's a forgery. Now, is it maybe did they write that on there later and it's a real painting to try to add value? That's just one more layer of problems that you get with Asian art because sometimes they do modify an original painting, and that's a problem also. So, but that's one of the first things I go to is I ask my past translators and my wife now, please translate it. Did you see any simplified characters? Bingo, you're done.
Yes.
Right.
Wow. Very interesting.
Yeah, right. So it's there's a lot of and like I said, the frame, you can flip a frame over and a frame should match the style that they used. If it's a modern one and it says, Hancho in Mexico, it was made in Mexico. So the frame you already got to take into question. Okay, why is there a brand new frame on this thing? There shouldn't be a frame on a 100-year-old painting or 200-year-old painting from Mexico in the last 30 years. So there's a lot of these simple little pieces of the puzzle you put together. And I'm certain it's the same with swords. There's little nuggets that you put together, and then you say, oh, this is actually real
Yes.
in this
I
case.
mean, if you come to later period, like crucible steel, like patterned crucible steel woods, as we say, you
Hmm.
cannot replicate that. Not
Right.
they, yeah, that's the make. I mean, not in that color, not in that composition. But when it goes to ancient swords, iron, bronze, then that's the difficulty.
Right. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the
I'm in
difficulty.
that quagmire right now. So,
Yes,
right.
that's the
So,
difficulty.
so it gets really complex. The Asian art gets very complex very fast. Another example would be Japanese prints. Lots of people have Japanese prints.
Yes,
Almost none of them are the first state. And most of them are worth 25 to 250 bucks. However, you get the right one and it can be worth a lot of money. And some Japanese prints are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not
yes,
many, but that's a lot of money for a little piece of paper that's this big around, right?
yes.
So, um, and so there's all like, again, it's a, you have learned yourself that this is why I never think I know enough. I always find another reason somebody faked me differently on something. And it's like, okay, now I got to learn about that thing because need to know when they use that trick.
You know, Greg, there is one thing which is very interesting, which is called patterned crucible. So let's stick to the source because I just would like to talk about some investment values. Because I also consult, as a consultant, I work for many major collectors. You know, there are different things. For example, if you go to Japanese Nihonto blades, like originally made Japanese,
Right,
today they make Japanese blades in
right,
Japan, which is very expensive. You know, it starts in simple blade, 10,000, 20,000, simple blade with no furnishing, nothing. But there are many, many in Nihonto blades which they cannot replicate
right,
still through all this kept tradition, like utsuri, like many other elements. Now, when it comes to crucible steel, making crucible steel was lost, was completely lost, right?
huh,
So it was lost, and then they tried to find again what it is, how they made it, and all these beautiful things. They started to do that. So I always say to clients, collect things, right, which you know that everyone
right,
who sees crucible steel, no one can replicate that
right,
because it makes it that you're make investing in an area which is rock solid, right? That's what I always tell my clients. This is going to be rock solid. Because any other thing, if you try to go and make investments in, and if it's not rock solid, then this is going to be a bit difficult. I'm not saying it's not possible. It makes it very, very, very difficult to tell,
right,
right? So that,
right.
that that's something which is very, very interesting to see. Now,
Well,
wait,
I have,
go
oh,
ahead, please.
sorry.
Go
No,
ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead. I
Then I
have a
just
question.
wanted to say that's what makes it very, very important to take into consideration.
Uh-huh. Right.
Yes.
Well, so let me ask you this. So if they're making a modern crucible steel piece and it can't be replicated, then by default, doesn't that imply that every single piece is unique and therefore it
Yes.
would be actually easier to fake because
No,
there's no way
no,
to repeat it?
because
It would all
let
be
me
unique.
just show it to you. We
Yeah,
are not
sure.
talking about we are not talking about pattern welded steel.
Uh-huh.
Look at
Yeah.
this.
Uh-huh. Right.
Do you see these patterns? This is
Oh
not
yeah, yeah.
welded
It's
steel. These are
beautiful.
crucible steel. These are crucible steel. And
Uh-huh.
these are Persian crucible steel.
Right,
And
right.
every expert knows, or every collector of these items, the modern technology, we have tried to replicate because I translated many Persian manuals on making crucible steel, and I cooperated with many smiths, one
Uh-huh.
from Finland, three from Germany, some American smiths.
Right.
There are not many people try to. They first of all they cannot get the color. We can tell by the coloring. We can tell by the patterns because the pattern is not welded steel.
Are you talking about the difference between the modern refound version versus the older
Yes,
ancient
yes,
antique version? I
yes.
got it. Okay, now I understand. Right.
Yes.
Got
And then they cannot do that. And then again, even if they make it, they cannot make this curve right, for
right.
example, like a Shamshir. And there are many elements. So once you have that, I mean, these pieces you see here are like very expensive. They come
Right.
from a major collection and a museum collection and a
Right.
very big major collection. So
Right.
these makes them very interesting in a sense that once you have them, and then on top of it, woods is a or crucible steel, very hard material,
Right.
making this, right?
Right.
Making these
Right.
patterns that they chiseled it by hand, right?
Yeah.
And then, these type of things, for example, I know, collectors who only collect Persian patterned crucible steel, in the
Uh-huh.
area of collection of blades, there are two
Uh-huh.
blades, which are the most expensive ones, one Japanese blades, one Persian blades. Not that the other blades are bad, but now,
Right. Right. I got
if you
it.
come, if you come to other blades, for example, you come to, um, let's say European blades which are don't have not most of them don't have this weld steel, and they're just let's say high carbon blade. So the
Hmm.
only thing that you can tell because they can be faked very much
Mm,
easily. So what you
right.
can tell by the balance, but you need to be a swordsman, have handled many antiques.
Right.
Balance is not correct. This is
Right.
not correct. Shape you can tell by the shape, but you
Right.
cannot tell by the way the steel is.
Can you
Crucible steel.
analyze it metallurgically and know if it's ancient versus modern?
Yes, you can
I would
do it to
assume
some
it's like the
extent.
tin issue, right?
Yes, but then the problem of steel is okay. If there is a material, if there is a material like carbon dating, but you need a piece of wood, piece of leather in it. But then where is the piece of wood? For example, the piece of wood is in the handle, right?
Right.
But then, how do you know if the handle was not replaced? That the,
I know, right. This is
you know,
like aging art. It's the same problem.
the same problem. They
Yeah,
might
yeah.
have
There's
got
always something.
yeah.
Right.
So that's why if you go by the blade and by the handle, it's for example like in these Persian blades,
Hmm.
and if you know what you're doing by swords, this is a rock solid investment.
Right,
I
right,
mean, for people who have lots of money, of course. I mean,
right.
I'm
Of
just an
course.
analyst, but those
Right.
guys who have just those guys who have lots of money to spend on these type of things is a rock solid investment because then they can always come back and then there is a beauty into that. But then when there is a possibility like bronze swords,
Hmm.
I did for a museum, for example, together with a friend of mine, an American friend, we did for a museum, and then we worked on bronze swords, and we could always tell by the composition, by the looks, by the layers of bronze, and you can almost always tell, right? But now they got very sophisticated, the fakers of them. In the
Hmm.
past, I remember when you got a fake, before you went to the metal composition, the balance was off. But then
Right.
they're getting the balance correctly.
Right, of course.
They learned the balance. And
Right.
then all of a sudden, then you said that, okay, that was the first, the metal, which is like yellowish. But if you get rid of that layer on top, which is this greenish, and then in the middle is this reddish, right? This oxidization level. But then what they do it with this, they got an epoxy, and they had a powder, pulverized, pulverized second layer. I don't know where
Oh,
they got it. So then
right.
they tried to stick it there.
Right.
Now the thing is, in the past, and with very strong epoxy, in the past, what we did was we opened the window, removed this greenish layer, then we reached this material which was
Right.
reddish. What in the past they did, that was they put a paste and it dried. But
Right.
when you put a small chisel on it and hammered it, it
It
jumped
flicked
out.
off.
But
Right.
now they put an epoxy with this pulverized thing. It is so strong, it behaves like an original oxidization layer.
That right. What is the
This is
material they're using to adhere it?
this is like a glue, a very strong glue.
Do you know
Very
the
strong.
name of it?
No, no. But
Is it a natural, like animal version, or is it a
it
synthetic?
could be both. If it's
Okay.
synthetic, if it is, it doesn't matter
Right.
because then you can have it analyzed. Because if
Right.
it's synthetic, doesn't
Right.
matter. If it's natural glue, if you find in the second layer there is any traces of glue, this is a
Right.
fake.
Right. Well,
This is
that's right. I get that, but my wonder was it should be really easy to test it then, right?
yes, it is. Yes, that's it.
Right.
You
Right.
can do it.
Right.
So
Right.
any absence of that layer is
Hmm.
a thing. But you know, the funny thing about these bronze items is also many of these bronze swords don't behave correctly. But then again, they got it now right, so
Right.
they
Right. Right.
behave and they have the right balance.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, for example, if they have any animal
Right.
motifs on them, then all of a sudden, you see the face of the animal doesn't look correctly, right?
Right. Yeah. This is the same thing in the art thing. The
Yes, you
same
see,
thing.
for example, I can give you one example. Iran, in the past, there were many lions,
Right.
right? Also in India, but they
Right.
were Asian lions.
Right.
And Asian lions do not look like African lions.
Right.
But then they,
Right. And
since
that's
young,
like finding a simplified character, right?
yes,
To your eye, that's
yes,
the same as finding the simplified character. You
yes.
go, that's the
Or
wrong lion.
yes, or some of them have elephants, but Asian elephants do not look like African elephants, right? So you know what I mean. So
Oh
these
yeah,
type of
absolutely.
things can
Right,
give you
right,
clue, but they're learning.
right.
They're
Oh
learning.
yeah. Yep,
They are,
yep. And
as you know that.
The Chinese are brutal. Chinese are brutal at being really good at faking stuff.
Yeah,
Really
brutal,
good
right?
at it. Yeah, oh yeah.
Yes.
It's just intense because they can be
Have you, for example, seen that anyone tries to fake Andy Warhol?
oh yeah, 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 yeah,
Oh
yeah, yeah.
God.
So in that process, when I had the guy looking at the Moreau, the Warhol, and the Picasso pieces, the Warhol, the Warhol Foundation, I think they closed it because too many people were suing them for saying they didn't have that they said it wasn't original. And again, this is the messenger thing, right? Where the messenger gets punished for telling you the truth. And so the Warhol, I talked to three of the top Warhol experts in the world, and I had questions about this piece because it's something seemed, it's just that little, this the little thing you're like, it doesn't feel right. I don't know what it is, but something's not quite right here. So I went to them and they all said no, that I don't believe that's an original. So I waved the client off. I said, don't buy it. We got three of the top people on the planet, including the Warhol Foundation, saying don't do it. That's not because I told him he's trying to buy these and he's asked me to help him protect them. And my goal is just to tell him what we really think. I don't care if it's positive or negative. I have no vested interest. I'm not getting any money out of him buying them. He's just hiring me to consult on it. And so I said, don't buy it. So out of the three pieces, the Moreau was a fake, the Picasso was a fake. And so I then questioned the dealer, right? Then I say, okay, who's this dealer? This dealer, obviously, if he knows enough, he knows he's selling fakes.
Exactly.
Otherwise, he doesn't know enough and he shouldn't be selling any of them.
Absolutely.
Right. So,
Absolutely.
right. I mean, we have the same thing in both of our businesses, just a different piece of art we're working on. You're working on a beautiful sword. I'm working on a beautiful painting.
Yes.
They're the same deal. We have to put these puzzles together.
Can I ask you a question? You also said about photography. So there are also very expensive ones, correct?
Right. Right.
Pictures and photos, right?
Right.
They
Yeah.
can be faked as well, right?
Yeah, they can be faked, but it's pretty obvious. I mean, if the photo paper is a modern paper, it wasn't printed in 1937,
Yeah, that's right.
right? So that's easier. And I don't even claim to go to that level. I still go to an expert to ask them to check the paper just because I want to be sure. Because there's a certain point where I say, I know what I'm doing. But there's a certain point where I say, okay, this is my limit, right? And I need to double check it minimally, if not ask a different expert to give their opinion. So I go to for the Warhol. I was not the Warhol, excuse me, for the Ansel Adams photograph. I was able to have the owners take it into a specialist in photography who did conservation work and knows the paper extremely well. And I had them write a little report on it. And they submitted that report back to me. I say, okay, all of this lines up. I get in touch with the family members of the Ansel Adams family because I happen to know them now. And I say, this is what I've got. Does it make sense to you? Because it just happened to be this was a very strange, very large size. And usually the larger an Ansel Adams photograph is, the more valuable it is. It's
Ah,
not absolute rule, but it's pretty close. This was in between the largest size and the next size down. And even the family was unaware of this size. So this is, was stunning to me because I assumed, look, there's nobody better than the people who actually grew up with this stuff. And so it boosted the value a little bit because nobody else had this size. And I only found, I think, two other photographs of any kind of atoms that were this size. So it was an early printing. It was signed by Ansel. It was printed by Ansel, and it was an unusual size. So it really boosted the value on the piece.
yes.
I mean, $250,000. That's a lot for a photograph.
Yeah, it is. God, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
What
So it's
about
very interesting.
jewels and jams? Are you also in that field?
No, I don't touch. I've had a little bit of training, and I say that I'm dangerous enough to say these aren't worth you looking at. These you need to take to a GIA person.
Yes.
I shouldn't touch them. When it's an antiquity, I have that antiquity ability. So I can say, I think this is actually old, but we still want to test the metal. We still want to test the gem. And I don't do that. I may take the courses. It's about 25 or $30,000 to go through all of the GIA
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, of
So,
course
and
it
I
is.
just talked to them 3 days ago
Yes, it is. It
because of the
is.
current case.
And of
So,
course, it's a really rock solid education you need to go through.
right,
Absolutely. It's not that
right,
easy.
right. Well, and one of the things, so part of the reason I haven't done it, I've meant to do it, is you used to have to travel for the classes a lot more. Now everything except for the labs is online.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
would just have to go down there. Technically, I might be able to do it in one trip, but I'll have to spend like 3 weeks there in Carlsbad, California. But they told me I can do all of the coursework from a distance, so I'm going to start it. Yeah, and I won't consider, even after I'm finished, I won't consider myself an expert
Yes.
because I just haven't handled anything.
Yes. Because there are also different stones. There are also different jam stones, precious stones, and each one of them again has a different range or different ranges,
Yeah,
Really.
well, so I don't know a lot about it, but you have a refractive index, you have
Yes.
hardness, Mohs hardness, you have cut. I mean, cut tells people who know a lot about a stone. Is it a modern cut versus an 1800s cut versus a much older cut?
Yes.
That alone would be great knowledge to have for what I do, because I could at least say to somebody, I think you might have an old stone here.
Mm,
Right now, I wouldn't touch it because I think it's unethical.
yes.
Like I said, I could take the garbage jewelry and get rid of it and say you need to check this with a person who knows.
Which other areas of antiques are you familiar with, Greg?
That's an interesting question. So I work on ivory, I work on jade. I don't, jade's probably the only quote unquote gemstone I will work with. I work with jewelry. Sometimes if it's old, if it's antique or ancient, I will consider working on it. But again, I default the metal identification and the stones to a professional. I won't do that.
Mm,
And then I work on modern Asian and Western paintings. I
mm,
work on ancient Asian paintings. Um, I work on textiles.
mm.
Uh, that's interesting. Bronzes. Um, what else? I do some arms and armor, but I could never say I'm even close to where you are with that stuff. I'm not. But I'm dangerous enough that I know that I can look at something, and then come to a person like you, and again I say, "What do you think? This is what I found. Do you agree or disagree?" And they know more than me. I have a mentor in Japanese swords,
Mhm.
and so I use my mentor to bounce Japanese swords off of after I've done my work. I do my
Mhm.
identification. I do what I think.
Mhm.
I pass it on for the second opinion. And if I'm
Mhm.
wrong, that's okay. I'd
Yes.
rather be accurate and
Mhm.
wrong and get the right answer.
You talked also about textile. Are they
Right.
fakes in textiles as well?
Yes. Especially China. Yeah. Especially
Oh,
in China. China, they're still making, imperial. Have you ever seen the thing? It's called a rank badge, and they'll have birds and
oh
mythical beasts.
yes, yes, yes,
Right.
yes.
So those are faked constantly. And it's actually pretty easy to tell. Um,
Mhm.
it's not quite, it's more of it's a carpet or a rug, but an example where I had my jaw drop. I was at somebody's house here in
Mhm.
Washington, and they were showing me all this other stuff. And I walked into the main room, and on their floor, I mean, it was like, boop, the light bulb went off. I was like, oh my God, they've got an imperial carpet from the Forbidden City. And so the first thing I did is, first thing I walked on it, I had no shoes on, and I could feel the gold wrapped threads. They were cold. And then I said, there's got to be a mark. They had it partly rolled up. I said, we've got to unroll this thing. And right at the top was the hall that it was in, which was originally the hall marked in Chinese calligraphy, left to right, because it isn't right to left now either. Um, the uh, and I forget the hall, but it was the hall that the emperor originally would meet in. And I think it was the Qianlong emperor, which is a really important emperor. And he moved it into the hall where it used to be a private hall. He moved it into this hall or had it made for this hall where he then
Mhm.
started to meet people
Mhm.
in. And so it was like, whoa. I said, okay, this we need to take seriously. So, and as you know, you get this instinct, right? You feel pieces talk to you.
Yes.
You could feel it's almost like, and I could tell you an interesting story if you want to hear it, but
Sure, sure. Go ahead, please.
there's, so people have heard me, they say, what did you just say? And I'll be with a piece and I'll say something to me, to the piece. It's like, I know you're trying to say something. Um, I had probably the most remarkable thing, and it got observed. So I have two witnesses to this. I
Yes.
was at a client's house. They were updating their appraisal on their art collection. They had a number of European pieces, sculptures, and a few American pieces, and a lot of Asian stuff. And we went through the whole house. They had, for their insurance company, it was a $15,000 limit. So I eliminated most of what needed to be rewritten up for an appraisal report because they didn't need it. It was below that number. And we sat down at the table, and I had, I think, 10, 12 pieces left out of maybe 100 we looked at that I said, I think we're going to have to do appraisals on these. And so we're sitting at the table, we're talking about, they're asking me about next steps. The wife is sitting at the end of the table. The husband's sitting next to me. He's a pediatric doctor. She was a pediatric nurse. The kitchen is behind us. It's really weird. I know you'll know this. Um, and we were talking, and all of a sudden I felt a tap. Literally, it was like something said, "Hey." And I turned and I looked at my shoulder and I looked at the ricochet. The ricochet, how I knew that, I don't know. At where it came from. And that second, I went, "What is that?" I mean, it was that fast. And my brain already knew that was important. I don't know how your brain figures that stuff out. It's remarkable to me. And they said, "Oh, well, we didn't show you that. We didn't think it was worth enough." And I said, "Do you mind if I go look at it? Because it's habit, right? I don't touch anything unless I'm told I can." And they said, "Oh, yeah, of course." And I'm walking up to the thing going, oh my God, this is amazing. And it's a little Buddhist statue, about 7 inches high. And I know it's real. I mean, you would have to prove to me with a lot of proof that it wasn't real in those 45 seconds. How I know, I don't know. And I walked over to it, and then I see the inscription, and I'm like, oh my God, it's actually a Ming Dynasty piece. So Ming is what, 1279 to 1644, I think. And I'm blown away. And so, or 13, what, it doesn't matter. Anyway, and I say, can I pick it up? Again, habit. And the first thing that I do with a lot of pieces is I look at the bottom. And the bottom's right. And it's still sealed. And it has some of the red cinnabar still attached to the inside rim, which tells me it was never opened because there are offerings inside to make it alive. And I don't know if you know this about Buddhist sculptures, but when a lama or a Buddhist sculpture is made correctly, they then bless it, and it's a living being then.
No, I didn't know
So,
that. Okay.
right. And so it's profound. And so I'm sitting here going, oh my God. And I set it down. I said, I think you need to let me do this piece too. And they said, oh, yeah, we figured we got it from this who used to be an important importer in New York. His parents got it in the 70s. And I went, oh, that's even better. She's now been found out, by the way. She's passed away, but her daughter's in trouble for being, what do you call it when you bring the things in illegally? What am I missing here?
Smuggling?
Yeah, smuggler. Yeah, so the daughter's in big trouble with the FBI and everything like this about being a smuggler now. Um, and
Why?
so,
But because they didn't buy it correctly with
yeah,
provenance?
they were sneaking pieces into the country, and yeah, they did a lot of stuff that you should never do if you're, especially if you're legitimate. And they had a huge reputation. I mean, the name of the mother alone, I'm not going to bring it up on here,
No, no.
but the name of the mother alone makes a piece important. So they were that important. Um, anyway, so I said, I think I need to work on this piece. And usually, what I do with my customers in appraisals is I like to start with something I call a cursory verbal consultation because it's the least expensive thing I can do. It's not an appraisal. We can stop it if I'm finding that it's not what we want it to be or it's not valuable enough. While an appraisal, I have to finish it completely before I give any of the results. That's just the way it works. I don't do it any other way. This is the way we're instructed to do it. Um, and so I usually will say, so those 13 pieces now, I was going to do a cursory verbal consultation on to say, look, we might eliminate a few more that don't need to be in an appraisal report, which is more expensive. So I go home. They told me we thought it was worth maybe 10 to 15,000. So that's why we didn't bring it up to you. I said, I think it's worth more than that. They said, okay, go ahead. Long story, try to shorten it a little bit. I do the work. I come back with a cursory verbal consultation, and usually I'm within 10 to 15% of an appraised value on my consultations, which is pretty accurate. Every once in a while, you're off. This one I said, I think it's going to be at least between 40 and $50,000 or something like that. And so, yeah, yeah, we need to have you do the appraisal. I do the appraisal. It takes me 2 days, and I recalculate like 9 times, $495,000. So I was way off, right? But in the right way. I was off in the right way. And I wrote in the report, I said, if you chose to sell this, I wouldn't be surprised if you got at least 1,250,000 for it, possibly more. So we they eventually said, would you help us sell it? I said, of course. And I can send you the link if you want to see the piece. It's beautiful. Um, and it sold for 1,300,000. Wait, 1.35, I think. 1,350,000, I think is what it sold for. So I was dead on with my numbers. But the thing and they said to me after we met again, they said, I don't know how you did that. And I said, you mean when the thing talked to me? And I said, I don't know either. I don't know how that happened. I don't know how that thing knew to touch me on the shoulder and make me look right at it. I mean, I didn't look anywhere else in that kitchen. I looked right at that Buddhist sculpture. I know you felt that before. I think you felt that before. But this is one of those weird things that happens if you deal with ancient pieces enough. They talk to you, right?
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, it's a really bizarre story. And I'm a science guy. That can't happen in my reality. And it happened. There's no doubt that happened. I don't know how. I don't know how. And it also backs up the fact that it was a living Buddhist deity because a living thing could have reached out to me, maybe. A dead thing couldn't have probably. So
Very interesting.
it's a long story, but it's an interesting one.
And there are different types of Buddhist statues, correct?
Oh
Buddha's
yeah,
statues, yes.
yeah. There's a ton of them. The deities are complex to say the least. You know, maybe you've noticed this, but over time, I've noticed that when a new religion or belief system starts, it's usually pretty simple. There are a few basic rules. You know, the Bible has the golden rules. I'm not sure what the base would be that's equivalent in Persian culture. I'm sure there's something like it. But as time progresses and people say, well, I don't agree with you, they split off into different groups, right? And those split off and those split off. So you get the tree happening and you get equal number of deities on every branch. And so you go from a few deities to thousands. And so you often have to look in and see, okay, what is this specific deity that I'm dealing with? There are just tons of them. And it takes hand for Buddhist things, you look at the hands and you look at the props they're holding. And do they have 50, 1,000 arms? Do they have, multiple faces? All of it is a different deity,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. It's like I said, Asian, especially uh, Eastern Asian art gets really complex really fast. I don't know about Iranian art as deeply as I probably should. I've done pieces from Iran a number of times, but I assume a similar thing happens. It gets more
Yeah,
and more
it's very
complex.
complex.
Right,
The Persian culture, Iranian culture has dominated in the region for
right. Well, it's
thousands
one
of
of the most
years.
brilliant cultures in the history of the world.
Yeah, she's very beautiful. You
Right.
also, in our, before we started the interview and recording it, you also mentioned that you were in Mongolia. Tell us something about your experience there.
So I was doing research on the relationship of traditional oral stories between the Mongol shamans, or I should say Mongol Siberian shamanism, and the Native American shamans. And
Wow.
which stories, because I'm one of those who believes that there was a crossing through, uh, what am I saying? Sorry, up by Alaska and Siberia.
Yes, yes. Mhm.
And that they also probably came over by boats, often by accident, I would assume, in a storm, and that there was this migration that occurred. And I have this theory that I was working on, which is a long story we don't need to get into, but I think that the arrival of human beings in the Americas was probably about 600,000 years ago. Uh, Now, very small groups of people, thus very hard to find any evidence. But in that process, the stories that came over,
Mhm.
basically the same stories because they're handed down. You have to learn them. You can't not learn them and tell them.
Mhm.
So the only way the stories got passed down is once you learn them, you are allowed to tell them again.
Mhm.
That's the same in traditional ancient Mongol society, Siberian society, the Buryats and people like that, the Satin people, the reindeer herders.
Yes.
Uh, and it's the same with Native Americans. And there are stories, and it was really hard to find. It was really hard to find this stuff. But one of the most curious ones, if you want me to talk about it,
Sure.
I can. But so that research brought me to a specific story I knew from my time doing ceremonies with my Native American friends. And it's a creation story. And the creation story, both groups have the same creation story essentially. And people were inside of the earth. They got tricked to come out, usually by a wolf. Sometimes it's a dog today because,
Mhm.
there's been bastardization of the stories over time.
Mhm.
But the essence is there. And I think I found one version where it was a cat. Uh, but they were then coaxed out
Yes.
onto the surface of the earth, and that's how people ended up being on Earth. And but it was the star people who had the wolf do this. The star people come from the Pleiades in almost every single story. Now, there was one difference. In Mongolia, they had it as the Big Dipper. I think that got changed over time.
Mm.
I think it got bastardized because everybody else says it's the Pleiades. And if you look at them, they're both dippers when you use your naked eye.
Mm.
Now, if you use a telescope, it's completely different. But
Yes.
so they say that the star people came to Earth, somehow took the form of a dog and or coaxed the wolf to go entice the people to come out onto the surface of the Earth. Both have it. Both say that it was in a cave. The cave in Mongolia is in the Altai Mountains. The cave in the Americas for this particular story is in the Badlands, or not the Badlands, in the oh my God, I'm slipping today, aren't I? Anyway, in some mountains in the Dakotas, there's a cave called Wind Cave. We know the cave. We know the cave in Mongolia. So they all came out of this cave. I mean, the whole story is the exact same. You just have to put it in the two different places. There is no change in the story. It's incredible. But that shows that this is an artifact. It is not a random memory. This is an artifact, just like a sword is, just like anything you dug out of the ground, but it's in the human brain. So you've got a artifact of time that is consistent through time until about 100 years ago in both cultures. And that's when it starts to change because in America, we devastated the Native Americans. I mean, we could have wiped them off the face of the earth because we were so terrible to them. We're still terrible to them to this day. In Mongolia, they're terrible to these people still right now. It's the exact same story. It's really bizarre, all the way down to what's happening politically today. So this is an artifact, a real artifact. It's a solid artifact. It just happens to be a thought. That was my main principle of doing this research, is to show that these were artifacts and they show this direct connection through very distant time between the Mongol Siberian shamans and the Native American shamans.
Can you tell us about shamans and shamanism? What is it exactly?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I've ever answered that question. Um, Shamanism is a belief that, how do I make it simple? I might not quite get it right because I think this is the first time I've ever answered this question. It's a belief that everything basically has its own spirit and its own concept, its own idea, and that it's equally important to us, just as much as a rock is equal to me as a human. So I can respect that rock, and this is partly maybe this piece is maybe my interpretation, but a rock to me has, maybe a million or billion years of history to it that it's experienced.
Yeah.
We can never communicate with a rock. It won't happen, I don't think. Maybe in a billion years from now, but we're not going to be able to communicate with a rock, and it can't communicate with us. Can show it respect. We can show each other respect. I stub my toe on a rock. I say, "What are you doing, rock?" If I split the rock, it's probably saying, why are you breaking me? At what level and what understanding, that's a different thing entirely. But it's the concept that you respect everything in nature. Have you heard of Gaia theory?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm not going to get into it, but Gaia theory is very similar. I see it as a shamanistic theory or concept. So, um, everything deserves respect because you'll get the respect back.
Do they believe in afterlife?
Yeah, I think so. Another really good curveball. Yes, because why would they bury all the stuff with the burials, right? Why would they send their drums and their tokens and things with them to the next world? I would say that that's a yes. Now the how is different. So the tree of life,
Yes.
right? So that's a really common theme for shamanism. And so you have the roots as the underworld, you have our Earth, and you have the tree going to the upper world.
Yes.
So those are three different realities, right? We're on
Yes.
the ground. They go to the upper world.
Yes.
So technically, I guess the answer would be yes, there is an afterlife. I think it's a continuance as
Mhm.
opposed to after,
Mhm.
because you evolve, kind of like in Buddhism. You
Yes.
can't be a Buddha unless you've achieved, enlightenment. So, but that's an achievement level.
Mhm.
So it's a continuum of learning about the process. And by the way, another interesting thing with similarity between Native American shamanism and Mongol shamanism,
Mhm.
all the young people don't want to have to go through all the steps here in America to become a proper shamanist in American ceremonies. They want to skip steps. Same thing in Mongolia. They don't have the patience to just say, okay, I'm apprenticing. This is what my job is right now. Yeah. And again, that has nothing to do with these verbal stories or any of that, but it's interesting that the psychology is the same.
So you traveled across Mongolia, right?
Hmm. Yeah. A
Beautiful.
lot. Yeah. Yeah. I've been all over Mongolia. Yeah. I haven't been to every part of Mongolia, but like I had told you, I've done 14,000 kilometers on the steppe of Mongolia, which is a lot. Yeah. And it's very interesting. I mean, as you have said, and it's a gorgeous, amazing country.
And it's a safe country, isn't it, Greg? Yes, it's very
Yeah, I
safe.
think so. I think, I'll tell you what. So white people have more problems, I think, than anybody else because there is a nationalism for Mongolia, and rightfully so. They were dominated by China for a couple hundred, 300 years. Then the Russians came, or the Soviets came in. They took part of the country. Just in the last, since the 1920s, Mongolia has lost two-thirds of the size of its country to China and to the Soviet Union.
Yes,
And so there is a national, so now they're independent, right? They're not a Soviet state. They're none of this anymore.
yes.
And so there's a strong drive in a lot of the kind of probably 40 to 20-year-olds to have a nationalistic thing. So when a white guy is there, that's potentially a bad thing.
Oh,
And right, well, it doesn't bother me. I respect it because they got their country back. They have a right to want to protect it. And I never had problems, but I know a lot of people who have gotten beat up and everything else. So
what?
yeah, but I also think that they probably pushed it or weren't, I don't want to sound like I'm some special guy, but they weren't as compassionate about understanding as I am. And I understood this concept. This concept is they didn't get their country until just after World War II, and they were still a Soviet state. They didn't become their own independent country again until 1990 when the Berlin Wall fell. And I've seen the remnants of what the Soviets did to that country. There were, I believe, something like 1,600 monasteries, Buddhist monasteries there. The Soviet period, they ripped down all but I think 5 or 10 of them. All. Yeah, they have a
Say
right
to
to
them.
defend their history.
What did they do to them?
They just destroyed them. They just
Oh, I thought
basically,
they transferred them to Moscow or to St.
oh, I'm
Petersburg.
sure they stole all the important stuff and took it back to Moscow, but they just basically tore down they are rebuilding their places still right now because they got destroyed. I mean, they got eviscerated for their cultural heritage of being, Genghis Khan shamanistic people.
Yeah, the communists didn't like that. Yes, yes, that's right.
Right, right. Yeah.
Exactly.
So and like you found, it's an incredible country. I mean, the feeling to be out in the steppe is just so liberating and grounding, and the people are so nice. And I don't think it's dangerous personally, but maybe it's because I have a different way to interact with people. But I didn't find it dangerous. Now I'm wary everywhere I go, even in Seattle. I
Yeah, of
always am
course. I
being
mean,
safe,
I
right?
mean, people always say, I always just say, I have like one of our members is from London. He always says the knife crime in London is very high. Also in Frankfurt, if you have a high crime rate, but London more. But
Right.
he has always something very nice to say. So, is this country safe? Is this country safe? I said, man, you come from London. What the hell are you talking about?
Yes, exactly. Right.
What are
Yeah,
you talking about? And
right.
he's so funny. He said, if someone comes like from a village, right,
Right.
in England, or some safe place, the
Right.
countryside, okay, you come from London. Oh, is that place safe? Can I travel there? And he said
Right.
many places in Asia are safer than London. It's so
Oh
funny, you
yeah.
know.
Yeah.
You know, he
Yeah.
said,
Well,
yeah,
one of the odd parts about China, right? So we've got one of the most intense communist countries in the world.
yeah,
I don't feel worried about anything. I've had two problems ever in all my time in China. One of them was a spat because a guy tried to take a taxi away from the women I was with. That was the worst probably experience I've had in China, and I intervened.
yes,
You know, that's not going to happen with me around.
yes,
So, China's extremely safe, for an example. I
yes,
think
yes.
Mongolia is very safe. There's a lot of petty crime. A guy tried to open my backpack and steal stuff out of it while I was walking in Mongolia, in Ulaanbaatar. So,
Okay.
and the woman said, "Look behind you." And I looked, and the guy's hand's in there. And lucky for me, I had a whole bunch of toilet paper in the top of my backpack. So, and I yelled at him and I swore. I shouldn't have sworn. I said, like, and I shouldn't have done that, but I did. And he ran away. I mean, there was no big problem, and everybody kind of laughed, and I just kept going. That
Yes.
was the worst experience I ever had in
Yeah.
Mongolia.
I mean, as well as you know that there, for example, people always say, "Oh, high crime rate in the U.S." They always say, "Where in the U.S.?" There are some places people just don't even lock their doors of
Right,
their house. I mean, where in the U.S. are we talking about high crime rate, right?
right.
You know,
Too much
yeah,
of the U.S.,
yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah,
U.S. is a it's a very safe and unsafe country at the same time. It's a very it's it's a conundrum
yes,
because my opinion is if you know where not to go, you're probably not going to have any issues. And that's the same with every place in the world. I mean, there were probably places in Ulaanbaatar, for example, I probably shouldn't have gone.
yeah.
And, I had friends with me most of the time, and they wouldn't take me there. So I didn't even know.
I mean, I was there, but I mean, okay, I was always with Mongolian friends and
Right.
hosts, and so do they have a crime rate there? I mean, high crime rate there?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Every city does, but it's there's as far as I can tell, there's a lot of petty crime.
Oh, petty crime.
And do you worry about it? Look, if he would have gotten my computer, I would have tackled him. I would have taken him down and probably not been very nice. If he had gotten a notebook of mine, I would have been mad because I have special notes in it. But I don't think I would have cared. Okay, you got a notebook. And if you got toilet paper, I would say, go to the bathroom. Go
Yeah,
ahead. If you need it, go.
that's
But
the thing.
yeah, I think you and I have a similar view on this concept that you just got to be smart. Everywhere is going to have a dangerous place. Frankfurt's got to have worse places and better places.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Here we have some dangerous places and
Right,
some places which are very nice, extremely nice, of
right,
course. Of course.
right. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Just the last question I would like to ask you. Can you tell
Hmm.
us a bit about your society you work for?
Oh, the International Society of Appraisers?
Yes.
Yeah, we don't work for them. We get trained by them. So
Great.
uh, we get accreditation.
Mm,
And
I see.
so the International Society of Appraisers is, I don't want to diss anybody out there in the world, make them upset. But as far as my understanding goes, there are three major professional appraisal organizations. The International Society of Appraisers, the Appraiser Association of America, or maybe it's the American Appraisers Association. I always screw it up. The Appraisal Society of America. They're kind of the big three. They're part of something called the Appraisal Foundation, which is they call it the congressionally approved or something to that effect uh, foundation that oversees the rules of the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice. Those standards apply to real estate appraisers, personal property appraisers, which is what I am. That's where art falls. Um, Aircraft, I think, is different, but I think it falls under there. Machinery and equipment falls under there. Um, there's something else I forget, but I think there's another area. And so they They give us, I mean, it's a huge book of standards and rules we have to learn. And the Appraisal Foundation oversees that. We are members of the Appraisal Foundation.
Mm.
We train through our groups,
Mm.
but we are independent.
We can
So it's
independent.
kind of like the GIA. The
Oh,
GIA
okay.
has, right. So they train the people, but they're independent after they go. But they get to use the credential GIA.
Yeah,
We
good.
use the credential ISA.
Mm.
So, and it's a group of people who are supposed to be very serious about holding up ethics and standards and doing things the right way for their customers. And
Mm.
that includes if you've got to say no,
Mm.
this is not the right fit for me. I can't do that. Like I said, if somebody brought me a whole bunch of jewelry,
Mm.
I can't do it. I just won't do it. I might separate it and say, no, these are costume jewelry, but you need somebody else to look at this stuff, not me.
Thanks a lot, Greg. It was
Yeah,
very,
thank you.
very interesting. Would you like to share anything else with us? We were,
I got married December 23 for the first time in my life. So very late in getting married
congratulations.
to a mainland Chinese woman. She has a daughter who has only known me as dad in her whole life.
Mm.
So she's my daughter. She's
Mm.
now 10. And I have a mother who is still kicking, who's 87
Mm.
and doing great, which I'm very happy about. And I'm originally from Minnesota in the Midwest. What else do I tell you about me? I don't know. Um, I try to be a decent man and
Thank
hope I get that in return.
Thank you very much, Greg. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. I hope to have you back. Maybe we can talk about other stuff also again on our channel. Thank you
Absolutely.
very
I would
much
love
and
that.
have a nice
Cheers.
day.
Thank you.